very honored, very pleased to be able to have this conversation with Professor Farrer. Last week, it was the 41st anniversary of the historic visit of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights to Argentina in the year '79. A visit that saved so many lives because it really was a turning point in the repressive process that the country was suffering at that time. And in 1984, 85, Professor Farrer was a witness at the trial of the juntas, a trial that he calls the Argentine Nuremberg. So we would like to hear from you your reflections on the transitional justice process of Argentina, and what are your memories and your thoughts about that?
Argentina, of course, had a remarkable transitional process. A question for me, a question I wanted to really discuss with you was, how did this trial come to pass? How was it that Raúl Alfonsín, the president, how was he elected? And how did he have the authority and the power to try the leaders of the armed forces, who, after all, had dominated Argentine politics for most of the 20th century? And at the same time, I've been asking myself, what led to the horrors, the massacre, the profound massacre, which in turn led ultimately to the trials? The function of the Commission in its famous 1979 visit was to, well, let me take one step back. How do ordinary, decent people live with massacre, systematic massacre and torture, quite widespread, going on around them? How do they continue their daily regime? How do they manage to feel at peace with themselves? Because they are basically morally decent people. They manage that by saying to themselves that, well, there is almost a civil war going on, and in such conflicts there are abusos. This is unfortunate, this is tragic, but it will end soon and we will return to normal life. You know, what they don't want to believe is that there is a large systematic campaign of torture and murder going on quietly. That's why the detention centers were clandestine. And of course, the media, with very few exceptions, was also quiescent, because people wanted to believe that things weren't so bad, that there was not something sick at the very core of society. So what the Commission did in 1979 was to write a report which said, things are much worse than you thought. There are not abusos. There is a systematic campaign of torture and extermination, and it is relatively indiscriminate too, because anyone who criticizes it also then becomes a victim of torture and extermination. Military prestige was unwinding, it was eroding quickly, but then the failure in the Malvinas, that ended it. So there was a total break. And that, I think, is what led to the election of Alfonsín, who said, I will restore decency, justice. We have order already, but it is a malign order. It is a malevolent order. But we now have to move to establish a just order. And we must cut out the cancer which grew as a consequence of the previous disorder. And people responded to that message, and he got a mandate. So Alfonsín and they were fortunate that a man as decent as Alfonsín should be available at that moment, because I think he was I came to know him a bit. In fact, when I was president of the University of New Mexico, I arranged to give him an honorary degree. So that's how I came to know. And I knew a few people who were close to him. So I have every reason to believe that he was a really honorable man who had a sense of the moment, a sense of what needed to be done, and had the courage to do it because it was a risk. And he did it carefully. And he was fortunate to have an excellent judge, D'Alessio, again, a man of great character, a man of the center, really, a man who belonged to the jockey club, you could say an impeccable man in that sense, even to conservative elements in society, as the chief judge. I also came to know him in later years, but not when I testified at the trial. And you had an outstanding prosecutor. So you had, by chance perhaps, the right people in place. And then the process had an aura of justice about it. And that was because you had a prosecutor who was presenting evidence. People had a sense of what a good legal process can look like, what a fair legal process could look like. I think this was an effort to restore institutionality to Argentine society, to government. We are in the United States threatened by a president who hungers for power, who is not a Democrat by instinct, is an authoritarian by instinct, feels warm feelings for other authoritarians, but he is inhibited by the institutions that have been built up over more than 200 years. So Alfonsín's contribution to Argentine society was to show that institutions matter, judicial institutions and prosecutorial institutions. So that was what was important. And of course, it confirmed, in laying out the evidence, it confirmed what had happened. It confirmed the report of the commission. I was happy to be able to participate in that process.
You have written recently on sovereignty, nationalism, and human rights, and with a special focus on the problem of immigration. We also have a great problem of forced migration in the case of the Venezuelans. 3 or 4 million Venezuelans are now living in different parts of Latin America. Do you envision an international agreement on the subject of immigration?
No, I don't. After all, an effort was made within the past year, and it was unsuccessful. Actually, I think you emphasize my liberal instincts on the issue of migration, but understate my conservative instincts. So let me clarify my position.
Sorry about that.
I'm a sort of a mix of John Stuart Mill and Edmund Burke. I recognize that, or I think I understand the fragility, the delicateness of liberalism and human rights, of the values that inspire human rights. Because human rights is an expression of deeper values, of a sense of the moral equality and dignity of all people. Human rights is an institutionalization or an instrumentalization of that premise, which is more than a premise, it's an emotional conviction. Now, my idealistic side says we should not, it would be unfair for people's opportunity to be a result of the accident of birth, of where you are born. We have to proceed cautiously. That's really what I'm saying. We who believe in liberal democracy, in the institutions which Alfonsín sought to strengthen, the trial being one of the ways of strengthening it, we who believe in this, in the importance of democratic institutions, knowing that all societies are imperfect, that we need to improve, but without those institutions, we won't improve. When it comes to the issue of migration, we say we must do it in a way which commands majority support. And we must not do it clandestinely. There must be a process of consultation with the society. And the way you consult with a large society is through the electoral process. So the issue of migration should be brought out, should be part of the platform, should be discussed at the political level. And I should add that foreign aid to try to make poor societies wealthier so that fewer people will want to migrate is clearly not the answer. Because the people who migrate from poorer societies are not the poorest, not the most desperately in need, because they are people living day to day. They don't have the money to pay for people movers.
I'm curious what you think about the relation between populism, which emerges constantly in these problems about immigration in Europe and elsewhere. The conflict between populism and liberal democracy and human rights.
We have to ask ourselves, what is populism? Because it's used in different ways. But I think there is a core idea behind our various uses. It is an appeal to people who feel powerless, who feel that there is an elite, there are forces out there which are regulating their life, the life of ordinary people, people who are dissatisfied with their life because they have lost their sense of social mobility or of a relatively elevated status. When you get into a meritocratic society, the people who are successful say, we are successful because we deserve to be successful. We earned this. I think there is a greater sense of separation from people who are successful from people who are less successful. There once was a simple society, and what happened to that simple society where I felt comfortable and people look for reasons for their dissatisfactions. And a very comforting reason is that it is not fate, or it is not forces beyond the control of us, just world historical forces like storms It is people, other people, groups of people. They are the cause of our frustrations. And then you have demagogues who come along and say, you're right. And they say, these are the people. So left populism said, the bad people are the capitalists. And we get rid of the capitalists. This is Lenin. We get rid of the capitalists, and then things will be good. Well, the more common case is the right demagogue who says, and they pick out the vulnerable groups. It is homosexuals. There's a homosexual conspiracy. There's a Jewish conspiracy. There's Indian, it depends on the society, particularly the vulnerable groups, and particularly where they have improved their status over time. That's what I call populism. Populism is a political movement which defines good people or real people or real, it has increasingly a nationalist tinge. That's the appeal of populism. The other. Without the other, there is no populism, which we must struggle against. That's all. It's an unending struggle. Liberalism is not the default drive. It's not the default in politics. It is, we must be as passionate and as hard-headed and as tough as our opponents.